Today we are covering some spreadsheet topics. So we're going to look at a couple functions and formulas and how those can work. And so I'll talk a little bit about just sort of basics in terms of typing a formula and dragging a formula and how some of that kind of stuff works. But there's a couple specific functions that we're going to look at so that this doesn't get to be too long a topic. We could certainly talk for hours and hours about the many functions that exist in spreadsheets, whether we're talking about Excel or Sheets. So this will be fairly specific and targeted that way. That's the idea anyway. So what we're going to do is take a peek here at the spreadsheet that I've just shared with everybody in the chat. And from that spreadsheet here, I've thrown up a little blurb here. I've done this on each of these tabs. And so what you've got here is this image box, which I can tell you how to create those too. It's obviously not related to functions. But you do have an option to sort of drop boxes like this onto your spreadsheets when you're working in Sheets here. For instructions and things. So that way you guys are going to have your own copy of this particular file, and you can use the instructions that are there and go through any of this material sort of at any time, really. But it will help you follow along with what we're doing right now. But to get started, I'm just going to grab this and just kind of move it out of the way for a second by dragging it off to the side slightly, and say that what we're looking at first here is just a bunch of fake data I created. In fact, the final tab on this spreadsheet, we're going to go through a few of these, but the last tab called fake data is kind of everything that I sort of slapped together here in terms of some fake student numbers and fake names, emails, some birthday data. This is some data I was using for mail merge stuff as well. So I've got a bunch of stuff here we don't really need. But I simplified it on the very first tab here and just renamed it compare lists. Because one thing that happens a lot is people will have one large list of whether it's staff or students or whatever it might be, and then a shorter list that they're asked to compare them and say, well, who is on this list that's on the other list? Or who's on this list that isn't on the other list, and vice versa. And I've run across people in the past, certainly, who will take that instruction and take those spreadsheets and print the data and take those two pieces of paper side by side with a pencil and start cross-referencing one thing to the next and trying to find. In this case, I've got, say, a bunch of students that have registered for some track and field events, and then I have just the students in my, I'll say, school. So as I scroll down, you'll see there's about 50-ish, say 43 registrations for our track and field event here that we're not really having. And then as I scroll down, you'll see, okay, well, there's actually, what have I got, 150, almost 200, 187 rows of names here. So obviously there's a bunch of kids in my list that aren't registered for any events. So I want to be able to tell on this list who's registered and who's not. Whether or not I know the actual event is extra, realistically. So what we're going to talk about is a formula here called Vlookup. And the Vlookup formula, what that does is allows you to vertically, hence the V, look up things that you find in a list. There's actually an HLOOKUP function as well that looks horizontally, but we're going to use vertical right now. It's far more common because, of course, your lists typically are, vertical lists this way. So what do? We're going to follow these instructions right here where it says to go to cell C2. So of course, if we're not super familiar with spreadsheets, the columns are all labeled with letters across the top here, and the rows are numbered. So letters and numbers, and it's just like calling a battleship, basically. The cell that I'm in right now is in column C, row 2. Hence, we call it C2. So that's known as a cell reference, I guess, or the name of the cell, which you can actually name cells, but that's getting into another piece of things here. So from in cell C2, I'm going to follow what I see in that little image blurb there. I'm going to type the equals symbol because every function or formula always has to start with an equals sign. And then I'll start typing VLOOKUP. And as soon as I do, I get this little bit of information popping up here. And if I click it, it should open up, and I actually get instructions about my function that I'm about to use here. So this is useful for every kind of function that you might choose to use, or even ones that you're trying to look up or discover or figure out what does this thing even do before you know what to do with it. Not only does it tell you how to fill it in, and give you examples about how to fill it in, but it tells you a little bit about what this thing is and then breaks it down a little bit further as you go down the instructions here usually. And finally, all of them will have a little Learn More link near the bottom. And the Learn More link is going to kick you out to a little support page, whether it be, in this case, the Google stuff or Microsoft if we're looking at Excel. And you're able to find more information about how that function works, like more examples, more variations on how to use it. And there's always an option in there of similar or related functions. So if you look up something and you're like, well, that's kind of what I'm after, but not quite, hitting that Learn More option is a great way to be like, oh, here's the formula I actually want that does what I'm trying to do. We'll get into that in a minute. So Vlookup, the first element it wants is what it calls the search key. So it's saying, what am I looking for? Simple enough. Well, in this case, what I'm looking for are the names in this list because I want to know if they also appear in this shorter list. So the search key in this case, if I just click into my formula bar here, let me get rid of some of my instructions. The search key is in fact right here, Benjamin Grimm. So it's B2. I'm just going to click that and it types B2. Now, if I reference my little instructions again over here on the side in the little bubble where it says equal VLOOKUP, of course, the first thing you see there is B2. So it types it in for me just by clicking that cell, which is nice. Now, a moment ago, my little helpful box was actually in the way of clicking that, so I got rid of it. If I didn't want to get rid of that, I certainly could just type B2, and it would work as well. But next element in my formula, if I come in here, I want to get those instructions back up just so you guys can see them. So I'm going to click this little question mark again. And it lets me know that the next thing that I need to look for here is the range. So it's saying, all right, now that you've told me what to look for, where am I looking? Because range is just a spreadsheet term for a bunch of cells. So what cells am I going to look at when I look for this thing that you just told me to search for? So fair enough, I'm going to hit comma, and in fact it even highlights that section, so I know that's what I'm looking at next. The range, in this case, is all these cells over here. So I have two options for that. I could click and drag, and you would see it starts highlighting all those cells in a nice purple color in this case, and it starts typing in those values for me. So E2 to F13 in this particular case. Now you'll notice, of course, in my example, there's no numbers. It's just E to F. That works too. In fact, it's a lot simpler. In this case, what I did was instead of typing the E2 to F, whatever the bottom number is, let me just delete that. And instead, I'm going to come over here and go E and F. I just clicked and dragged to the side and I release my mouse button and it has typed in the entirety of column E and F for me. So it's all going to be accounted for. It's going to look all the way down that column, even where there might be blanks potentially. Now hit the comma. And the next element in my little lookup formula here that it wants to know, now that it knows what to look for and where to look, it says, all right, well, of this table you just told me to look in, what do you want me to spit back at you? What result are you looking for in this particular search that you're going to do? Well, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to say, give me the name again, because the name's already right here. So I'm good there. If I'm going to take anything, I might as well take the event name. So that means the index in this case is what column of that range do you want me to give you a result from? Well, we have two columns. So I want the second column, hence the number 2 in our formula. Now, if this was that larger fake data sheet that I showed at the very start there, where there's many, many, many columns, I would have to select that entire range of data. It would find the first name, and then I'd say, okay, spit back row or column like 8 or 9 or 10, I think, looking at what that is. We'd have to go confirm that real quick. But I wanted to keep this simple. My babbling probably doesn't make it sound simple. But basically, it's the second column in this group that I have specified. So that's why I'm putting in a number 2. I'll hit my comma. And the last thing it wants to know is it sorted? Because if it's sorted, what the formula will do is come down and find the first thing that looks close to what you're looking for and spit that result back at you. Now, in this case, I did actually sort this by name, but as just kind of a rule of thumb, I will always say false. Because I don't know for sure that this is in fact sorted the way I think it's sorted. Maybe it's not. Maybe I pulled this from PowerSchool, or I pulled this from a spreadsheet from a Google form, or it's been typed in by a teacher or somebody else. I have no idea if it's actually sorted the way I think it is, and I don't need to even spend the time to figure that out. I'm simply going to say false, because even if it is sorted, it'll still work. So false is my go-to option on that one. I'm going to hit the closed bracket, and my formula will be finished. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter. Now, with any formula, right now it's giving me an NA result, which is letting me know, hey, you know what? It did not find Benjamin Grimm in this particular list. And that's the error it even tells me when I hover over it. Didn't find him. Okay, fine. So now I know he didn't register for any track and field events. But of course, I need this to go all the way down my list. So I'm going to click on that particular cell. I am going to put my mouse over the very lower right corner, and this is a huge one. I'm sure you've done it before if you've worked with formulas really at all, but it's worth mentioning because as I move my mouse around, things change a little bit. If I put my mouse on the top edge, I get the little hand. That's how I can grab the contents of a cell and just move it around. I can click into the cell, of course, to start editing it if I needed to, but really important is when I put my mouse on that lower corner and I get that plus symbol. That's what we'll refer to as the fill handle. You can grab onto the cell. I'm going to click my mouse right now and start dragging down vertically. And when I let go, it has copied that formula and gone all the way down my list now. And the one thing that keeps changing, if I were to look at this formula, is B3. It was B2, of course, the first time because it was looking at the first person. But as I drag vertically, it will write in new row numbers for me. So as I go down this and I'm investigating, I can see it's looking at B4, B5, B6, B7, which is exactly what I want. And if for whatever reason I was questioning what cells that even was, you can always come up to the formula bar at the top here and click into it, and it will start highlighting everything in those colors that you see. So where B7 is yellow, it is now putting a yellow box around that particular cell. And when I look at my formula, I see that EF is purple. Of course, it is putting a purple box around all of those cells as well. Now, that's kind of ugly. It's not really what I would want to see. It's not the prettiest thing in the world to have NA on a lot of my entries here. Because remember, if I'm pushing 200 people and I know I've got less than 50 entries, I'm going to have a lot of NA on this list, which if I was going to say print it, somebody wanted just a list of who was registered kind of thing and who wasn't, that's a kind of an ugly way to print it. So I come back to my little image here and I look at the next part. To avoid errors, we're going to put the function that we just wrote inside another one because you can do that with a lot of different functions. Put one function inside of another, inside of another, inside of another. You would call that nested functions. And it's fairly simple to do. The idea here, delete all those extras, so I'm back onto just C2. The idea is that I'm going to use a function here called if error. And if error just says, all right, if whatever I have here, whatever I'm calculating shows up as an error, then I will spit out a particular, I'll give you the result basically if it's not an error, or I'll give you some other result if it is. It's a weird way to say it. So let's jump in and see what the help information says. I'm going to get rid of, well, not get rid of this information. I'm going to put my cursor at the very start, right where the equals symbol is, and I'm going to type if error. And I need to be careful there. There is, in fact, another function called is error, but I want to say if in this case, if error. And if there is an error of this particular value, basically what it'll do is if that value, whatever it happens to be, it could be 1 plus 1, or this cell plus that cell, or this cell divided by another cell, whatever your bit of equation is in that first little section here, if it results in a real number or a real result, it'll just let it happen. But if there's an error, it says, all right, well, tell me what you want to put on screen, basically. And it gives me the option to put something there. So I will open the bracket, as I did, My whole VLOOKUP formula is this first value, so I don't need to touch anything there. I just come to the end of the cell, or the end of the row, I should say, and put in my comma. Done. I've given it the value. Now the next part, I actually could just leave blank, and I'll do that right now. I'm not going to put anything there. I'll just close the bracket and hit enter. Now my NA is not an NA anymore, because if there is nothing at all, it just, or sorry, if there is an error, it just gives me nothing, because I didn't give it anything in particular to say. If I grab that little handle and drag down, much cleaner. Now I'm getting results where there's a result, and I get a blank whenever there's an actual error in that function. But of course, you're saying, hey, I looked at your little blurb here in the little box, and it's not blank. You actually typed something. Because that's the option, is I can decide, all right, if there's an error, what am I going to do? And that's going to happen after this particular little comma here. And I could do just about anything. I could, in this case, put some text in there. And because it's text, I put little quotes around it. But I could also do some other calculation if I wanted to. I could throw some other whole function in there if I wanted to. Say, if there's an error doing that, hey, go look at this other list maybe. Or, I mean, sky's the limit. You could really throw a lot of different things into there, but we're going to keep it, again, simple by clicking on C2, going up here, and in quotes, I could say, in this case, not registered. Oh, there we go. Registered. Yeah, there we go. Not registered. And leave it at that. I could type really anything else I want to. I could type something like, contact to find out if they want to register, or, send email to teacher, whatever you want. You could write any kind of little note in there. You could do all sorts of things. But I'm going to leave it at not registered. I'm going to hit enter. This time I can click that. I didn't type registered properly. Registered. I think that's good. Oh, geez. Okay. Click, grab the corner, and I'm going to drag that down. This time I'll drag the whole list, just so we can see it actually works all the way down. Go, 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 and I'll wait, and I'll wait, and I'll wait. Now, in some instances, you will find that it will automatically recognize formulas when you put them in there, and then it will um, say, hey, do you want to fill this down the list? And you just click the little checkbox. That seems to be, I won't say hit and miss. It depends on how you're typing things in and what you're doing. You may have even seen that as you were typing here today if you're following along in your own version of it. I've done enough sort of messing around and deleting and backing up that it's not prompting me right now to fill in the formula. So let me just double check our chat here and see if there's any questions there yet. Are you guys okay? No questions in there. Hopefully you're able to get your version there and follow along. But it's going to be a much faster way, of course, than what I suggested at the beginning, printing stuff out and then trying to cross-reference this. This is done now for all 200 kids. I know who's registered and who's not. And in fact, if I want to make this stand out a little bit more, we could use some conditional formatting maybe. I could click on column C here. And remember, conditional formatting is under the Format menu. I can come down to conditional formatting here, click, and when I choose that, I'm going to get a little side panel popping out here. And it's already got column C from 1 all the way to 1,000 all selected for me, so the whole column. And with conditional formatting, if you've never used it, it basically just allows you to say, hey, based on whatever rule you've decided, I'll format the cell a different way. In this case, what I'll do is say, you know what, if the text contains not registered, then I'm going to make you maybe this yellow color, and I'm going to make that font a bit smaller. I don't really need to be quite so big. Let's see, that's the formatting style. Can I make it smaller, or does it just let me mess with your colors here? Looks like it does. Okay, so it's not going to let me do that. Maybe I'll use another approach. I'm going to say add another rule to that same group of cells. And I'm going to say if the text does not contain not registered, then I want you to not mess with the formatting so much. Oh, custom format. Will that give me what I was looking for? Nope. Okay. I'm going to, sorry, get rid of the colors. I don't need to highlight the colors on that one. I'm going to make you bold. There. There we go. So you're not colored, but you're bold. Let's do that. Done. So that actually means I've got two rules going there. One that makes my not registereds show up with a color, and all of my registered ones are nice and bold. So however you want to make that look, basically, you can mess around with the look and feel of that. And if things changed, if suddenly, I don't know, where's Benjamin here on the list? I'm sure I can find him. Oh no, I can't because he's not registered. Dummy. Who can I grab quickly here? Let's say Hank. If Hank suddenly wasn't registered, delete, then Hank now gets a blank. He's no longer going to have anything there. And that's really odd that it didn't immediately show up as not registered. That one, I think, is just a result of it sort of not catching up to what I'm doing real quick here. I suspect if I were to simply refresh my web page, that would wake up. So let's see what happens to Hank when I refresh my page. Is Hank registered or is he blank? Oh, he's still blank. Hmm, that's rather surprising. What did I just do? I broke it somehow. Oh, because it's returning. Oh, I'm silly. I left Hank on the list, but so it found him. That's why it's not an error and not registered. It found him and it's returning the blank that was actually there. This is what I would actually do. Sorry, delete Hank's name entirely, and then it will immediately, without me having to mess around at all, show up as not registered. That was me not thinking that through. But that's okay. We just sort of see and can dissect what's going on with these. If I simply undo that, he'll go blank because his name popped back up, and I could register him for whatever. I'll make him part of the pentathlon in this case. There we go. But there we go. So Vlookup is going to give you that easy option to just write the formula once, even if you don't use the whole error thing. Um, just using that Vlookup formula is going to let you quickly compare what you find on one list to what, or sorry, on one list here to what you either may or may not find on the other list. So whether it's, again, absences, or is there a phone number or not a phone number, or are they registered for something, or are they above a certain age? There's all sorts of comparisons that you might make in that sense. But we can carry on. That's enough with that particular sheet. Again, you've obviously got some instructions there to help you mess around with this when you want to try it. The next tab over, I'm doing a little bit differently. This one I called events. And the idea is that instead of taking that registered list and just comparing them, I said, in this case, all right, I've got all my lists here for my event day, and I had all the kids register. I'm going to look at fake data here for a second. And I know they're registered for a bunch of track and field events. Well, first thing I'm going to do here is just take a look at this data. I can see, okay, column M is where that track and field information happens to be. Column B is where the names happen to be. Certainly scrolling back and forth is a bit of a pain, so here's another little tip in terms of spreadsheets that you can always do. I'm going to freeze some rows and columns here. So I'm going to go up to the View menu, use the Freeze option. Ooh, sorry, View, come on, Freeze. And I want to freeze the first row. Good. I get that little thick gray line sitting there now so that I can scroll up and down my couple hundred kids here, and I always know what column I'm in. So that helps. But then I also want to freeze up to the second column here so that I have the names stuck in place. So I'm going to go View, Freeze, and I'm going to come down to the columns and choose two columns. And freezing rows, freezing panes like this is very, very, very identical over in Excel. You can do the same thing there as well. So now I can scroll to the side and I can see exactly which events these kids all signed up for. And I haven't lost the data at all. It's all still there. It's just sort of sliding behind my frozen column. When I think of that battleship example, I can see pretty quickly, oh, I'm going from column B to column M. So there's clearly something there I'm not seeing. I would just need to grab my scroll bar and come back to be able to look at all that information. But what we want to do is say, all right, who is registered for what? I need a list so that I can give the, the running information to the running coach and the jumping information to the jumping coach, whatever it is we might be doing here. So I'm going to go over to events again. And on that events tab, we'll go ahead and we'll follow the little instructions that we have here. It lets me know to complete this list by entering a formula into A3. So I come over and I look at A3. And in this case, I'm going to use a function called filter. And so there is a tool for filtering as well, right up on your toolbar. That is over here. It looks like a funnel. Well, maybe just to make sense of this real quick, what I would do if I came to my fake data, so here's a demonstration part. If I said, you know what, I'm going to filter this data, I click the filter button, everything kind of gets highlighted and it can see all the data that I'm looking at. It's going to understand what's going on, and I scroll over to my track and field data, and I click this little green arrow that I see up in the header here, my column header. I'm going to click that and say, you know what, I only want to see, let me clear some values, I only want to see the people who are signed up for the 800-meter run. Click. And I say, okay. What that does, if you've never used it, is filters out all of the people who selected the 800-meter run. And there's a handful of them, well, there's a bunch of them there. I'm sure I can find one that's got a little bit less. Let's see, how many people did I put in my fake event for the javelin throw? Okay, much smaller. There we go, 4 people. So the filter is a great way to quickly, summarize and reduce and filter out information you don't want to see, just to get a quick answer. Hey, how many javelin throwers are there? Oh, there's 4, and this is who they are. But that's something you're going to end up turning on and turning off and adjusting constantly. It's not something you're going to be able to print if, as I suggested, you want a list of all the different events and all the different kids registered. So, as far as our examples go, let's go back to that Events tab for a moment. On that Events tab, as it suggests in the directions here, I'm going to go to A3 and I'm going to type in this filter formula. So I'm going to go equals filter, because this formula does effectively within this one cell what I just demoed on the other sheet there. It's going to limit the amount of things that I see based on a criteria like who's doing the javelin. So it wants to know, of course, much like my other one, what range am I looking at here? What cells am I going to be filtering? Well, the cells you're going to filter are going to be over on my fake data, and I want you to filter column B. So I'm just going to click on B so it gets the entire thing, comma. The condition, if I come back to events here so I can see, the condition part is that over on, oh, I have to update that. Sorry, it shouldn't say complete list. It should say fake data. I changed that previously, and I guess I missed this one. It's going to say fake data as my criteria, where column M is equal to A2, which is my actual event that I'm looking at here. So again, I don't want to have to type in fake data. I'm going to go over to that actual tab for a second and say that my criteria here, my condition, is that whatever you see in M is equal to the event here that I have in my column, which is cell A2 at the moment. I'm going to close that bracket. So even before I hit enter, I'll just make sense of it again real quick for you. I'm going to filter out the names, which is column B. Anytime, show me just the names where the event, column M, matches A2, which is what I have right here in the cell that we can't quite see, the name of the event. So I'm going to hit enter, done. It thinks for a second, and boom. There's all the kids registered for the 100-meter run. Now, before I drag it over, what I'm going to do in a moment here is grab this little fill handle, and I'm going to drag this all the way across my sheet. I'm going to be able to do this entire sheet all at once. And that's, again, the beauty of functions and formulas and spreadsheets is I might have to think kind of hard once about writing this formula the first time, but now that I've done it, I'm going to be able to drag this across and have my entire sheet for all of my events done in a moment. But before that moment happens, I need to think for a moment. Lots of moments here. When I look at this, I can see there's a dollar sign in there that didn't happen when I just clicked on column B. Well, the dollar signs are what's referred to as an absolute value, or an absolute reference. Because as you saw previously, when I come to my compare lists guy, and I look at my formula, I know that as I dragged it down the rows, it kept adjusting. It kept looking at row 4, row 5, row 6, row 7, and that's awesome. That's exactly what I want, because it needs to look at the correct data to make the match. Well, in this case, when I come back to my events, I'm about to drag this across columns. So instead of down rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to drag it across these columns. But I need the fake data in column B, which is where the names are, and the track and field events in column M, where the events are, to always be column B and column M. Well, if I were to just grab Emma Frost here and click that and start dragging across my list, it's going to break real quick. Because when I investigate it and I find out what happened, it's looking at column C for the names and column N for the events. And that's, of course, never going to work because that's not where they are. So I'm going to click undo. I want to know that when I drag this across, the A2 part is going to change. I need it to look at B2, C2, D2, E2, where all these different event names are all the way across, constantly changing the column letter. But I don't want B and M to change. It must remain fixed. So, dollar signs. I'm going to throw a dollar sign in front of the B and then in front of the other B so that it knows that no matter what, do not change that B column. You're only ever going to look at fake data in column B where those names are. And you're only going to compare it to column M. So dollar sign in front of the M, dollar sign in front of the M. And that way, it's always looking at my event data. The A2 I can leave alone, that part's fine. I do want that to increment all the way across the A's, A, B, C, D. So I'm going to hit enter. Nothing really changes yet, because of course that formula was already working. But now, I click here, I drag across, and I'm going to go, I'll go to here for right now. Boop. And it's just filled in all those names for all those different events. And yes, I can keep going. So I'm going to grab that, drag it across, all the way. Let's see how many events we have. I'll just let it scroll to here. Perfect, and let go. And now I've got all my events. Looks like nobody signed up for shot put. And let me get this little image box out of the way here. I'll just slide them over that way so you can see. Beautiful. So a little spreadsheet tip, I guess, since these names are all overlapping each other, printing that would be kind of a disaster. I wouldn't be able to read much of anything. So let's do some automatic sizing. If you haven't done this before, again, works in both systems the same way. I'm going to come up to my column here and put my mouse right between two of my columns. So for my quick demo here, it'll be C and D, and I'm just going to double click. That will immediately, in this case, resize column C to fit whatever the longest bit of data is. Just auto fit is what that is. But of course, I'm not going to sit here clicking every single column. That's a waste of time. I'm going to undo and show you the faster way. Anytime you want to select an entire sheet of data to do anything to it, whether it's make everything bold or copy it, or in this case, resize some columns, you can come up to the top corner here, ignoring our battleship references, the A1 and B2, and click the absolute top left corner where there is no number or letter. And when you click that, it selects your entire sheet all at once. From there, now I can go between any of these columns. It's not going to matter if it's B, C, D, E, whatever, and double click. That will do the automatic resizing for me, there we go, on all of them at once. And then I just click anywhere in the spreadsheet to let go of that stuff, and it'll stop selecting it. So that is much more print friendly. I mean, it's a big wide spreadsheet. I don't know what size of piece of paper I'm going to do that on, but if I was going to actually print it, at least now I'm going to be able to read all of the names that I've got in there when it does come to that. Now, I mentioned Excel being not a problem, but there's certain things that Excel doesn't necessarily have. Sorry, let me just get rid of that for a second. Come on. I didn't want to double click. I just want to drag you over here so people can read you again. Click, drag. Okay. So I threw a little tip here at the bottom. The filter function doesn't exist in Excel. For whatever reason, it just doesn't. They don't have filter. They have filters, and you can do my initial demo there where I filtered an entire list, but they don't have this filter function where you can actually look at something from one place and filter it somewhere else. But that's okay, because it does do it here. So if I had collected a bunch of registration information as we sort of pretended to here, and then wanted to break it down into all these lists, that's easy, and I just did it. If I then said, all right, well, I need all of this information in Excel because I'm going to do a mail merge or I'm going to do something else with it, or there's just some other function and I'm more comfortable in Excel, whatever the reason, you can copy this data over to Excel. I would select the entire sheet just like I did a moment ago for messing around with my columns. I would copy it, so I could use Control C, I could right click and choose copy. I could use my edit menu, of course, and say copy. But what's important is that when I go over to Excel, I don't just paste it. I have to make sure that I choose values only. And the button is up there. It looks slightly different in Excel, but the option is the same, that you're going to paste the value only, not the formulas. Because, of course, as I'm suggesting here, this filter function that we have all across row 3 would not translate properly in Excel. It would just break. But if I paste the values only, it ignores any kind of function or formula and just pastes in the text that you see. It doesn't try and calculate anything. It doesn't try and bring any functions over to Excel. It will just take the raw data that you're staring at, the words and text essentially that you're seeing, and paste it as you see it into Excel. So you're not, as much as this function doesn't exist in Excel, you can still do it over here in Sheets if that's the case, if you needed it, and then paste this information right into Excel as you see it. And so that part is sort of your workaround if you did need to get into Excel for any reason. If not, I just leave it right here and continue working. A little bit of time here. I'm not going to go through quite everything necessarily. I wanted to provide a little bit more for you to play with. There's a city option here where all I was going to do basically was just show you another simple function using both a unique feature and a counting feature. And the idea is that you want to know in my fake data here where I've got lots and lots of stuff. What kids, how many kids, I should say, come from each of these cities that I threw in here? Well, this is a pretty easy one. I'm going to show you how this works so that you know these functions are an option for you, basically. But I'll go a little bit quick because I don't want to certainly don't want to take more than an hour here today. I want to get us wrapped up shortly. So I'm going to follow the instructions as it suggests and type equals unique. This unfortunately is another one that doesn't exist in Excel, kind of drives me nuts because I like using it. What it'll do is look at any range of cells that I give it, as I'm about to give it a whole range with all those cities in it, and it responds by giving me just unique values. So one instance of each unique item that it sees, rather than the big giant list. So the range is going to be overall in fake data, and I want the entire H column, basically. Now in this case, I typed in H2 because I didn't need the word cities at the top. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to click. I'm going to go over to H. Now I can click here, and at first it's going to show me fake data for the entire column. Now there won't be any kids in the word city. So to avoid even having the word city in there, I'm going to click into the address bar for a moment and just adjust that to say, you know what, I don't need you starting at the very top. I'm going to have you start at H2. So it's not including the word city anymore, and you can see it's not even orange anymore. It's not highlighted the same way. Comma. And in fact, I don't need to do anything else. I'm just going to go ahead and say close the bracket and hit enter. That's it. Done. So now it looked at that and it's spitting back again those unique values. Now next to it, I want to count how many times Lindsay showed up, how many times Omimi showed up, how many times Peterborough showed up, that kind of thing. So there is an option, another function called count if. This one definitely does exist in Excel. You can use this one without any messing around. I could say equals count, and as you see, there's a bunch of different count options. There's count like regular count, there's count A, there's count if, count ifs with an S, count blank, count unique, all sorts of things in here. In fact, count the number of unique values in a range, that would be useful a little bit as well. In this case, I think if I were to use count unique on the entire column, it would spit back, how many cities do we have? 6, 7. It would give me the number 7. But what I'm going to use is count if, because it's a condition. I want you to count everything that you find in fake data H, where all those cities are listed, assuming it matches what you see in A2. So this is a lot like our filter comparison type thing we did on the very first compare list option. I'm going to go to fake data, go to H, click it. Boom. I don't even care about the H1, H2, this part. You can look at city all you want because I know it's not going to be on the other list. So it just won't get counted, which is fine. The criteria, I'm going to go comma, is that it matches whatever I see right next to it. So in this case, Lindsay. And typing in, using A2 is awesome because I don't have to type the word here. I don't even know what words are going to come up when I initially type in the unique function because I don't know what cities are on that list, and we don't care. We're going to let that function just find them all for us. And now I'm saying count everything you find in that big long column if it matches this. And I will hit enter. And here's one of those autofills I mentioned earlier. This one obviously I hadn't messed with quite enough to confuse it. So it sees what I've done and immediately says, hey, do you want to autofill this all the way down? Of course I do. This is just doing the fill handle for me. I don't have to click and drag. So sure, hit the checkbox. Done. And as I scroll down, I can confirm that it's looking at A3, A4, A5, A6. And now I know exactly how many kids are coming from each of these different cities. The very last one I threw in as a real sort of bonus extra kind of option just to mess around with it a little bit. This one I called awards. Um, so even before I get into that, just in case, I'll point out on my little blurb here, I also mentioned that you can select that data and very quickly make a chart out of it. Because I was trying to imagine what usefulness would there be in counting up these cities here, and you never know, but If you wanted to chart things and make it visual, you simply highlight the data that you're interested in and click the chart button. Blink. It's right up there next to filter at the end of your toolbar. And the chart button will look at the data that you've grabbed and spin up a chart for you. And I can decide if I want a column chart or maybe I just want a pie chart. I can decide, colors that I'm going to use, what labels I'm going to use, all sorts of things. If I went to say customize here, I could go to pie slice and it would let me decide what color is Lindsay going to be. Oh, if blue's not my favorite color, I could go with purple. Make Lindsay purple if I felt like it. So you can change these as much as you want. You can kind of create explosion type stuff for that particular pie slice. You can do a bunch of different manipulation to these different charts by going through the options that you have here for your axis, your legend, your style, all that sort of stuff. But that's a whole chart lesson unto itself. I'm actually going to talk about charts a little bit, I think, next week. So that's a fun option. The awards one here that I threw in as our last little tidbit also uses some functions here, also using that Vlookup function the same way. But this time, it's actually referencing something else. So this brings in the idea of data validation. Slightly different topic, but I thought I'd slap it in here as like a little bonus bit for those of you that have stuck around this long. What you can do in this case, I've sort of mocked up a pretend little certificate here that I want to maybe print for somebody on that list. Well, what I would do in this case is I'm going to click that big giant cell I created in the middle where the person's name would go. And I'm going to use this criteria here to create a drop-down list. The option is called data validation, and it's just saying, hey, you can only put certain data in here, and what criteria am I going to use to decide if it's okay? In this case, I go data, I come down to data validation. I can validate it a number of different ways. You can say things like only type in the cell if it's a number, or only type in the cell if it's a date. But I'm going to go for a list from a range. And the range is going to be all those kids in my list. So I click it. And it wants me to type in the range, but of course we're against typing here. So I'm going to go right down to my fake data tab and select the entire column B. Done. So I want all those names as options. I'll say OK. That's my data that I want to look at. I'm going to say save. And just by doing that, it means that over in my awards tab here, I now have a little drop-down list, and I can choose any kid I want. So I'll start with Benjamin at the top. Great. The other thing I was going to do is go to B6 here. Oh, sorry, that's the one I just did, is I want to find out what are they getting an award for. Well, that was one of my columns here in fake data. So I'm going to go equals Vlookup. We're going to go find it. I'm going to look up based on whatever name is right here. We're going to go find them in our fake data, and I'm going to return whatever award they've got. So my search key is right there, B2, or B6, I should say, comma. The range I want you to start searching in is my fake data. So I'm going to go there, and I want you to search. I'm going to have to do a lot this time, from column B all the way over to award, which is K. All right, and I go column index. Okay, so it's saying which column do you want me to spit back a result from? Because the way the VLOOKUP will work, and I could have mentioned this the first time, is of the big range that I'm looking at, it will only do its search in column 1, the first column that it has as part of its range. That's always the column that it will search in. And then any of these columns can be used for spitting back a result. Well, the result is going to be over in K. But the index doesn't know anything about the column letters. I could have started at E for all it knows. It just says, hey, of that range you just gave me, which column do you want? So I'm going to look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, column 10. Is it sorted? Well, as usual, I'm going to say false because I don't even know. Close the bracket and hit enter. Math. There we go. So Benjamin gets an Outstanding Achievement Award for math. Now, if I decided I need to change that, and I need to print a certificate for Jean Grey, I'll click her, and oh look, she did rugby. So that value, because it's based on this drop-down list, which I can keep changing, this value keeps updating itself. Obviously, I wouldn't leave this big box of text here, but if that was out of the way, and this is my little certificate, I could go ahead and just print that. And then when someone says, hey, you forgot the certificate for Hank. Oh, geez, not Hank again. Let me go to Hank. Apparently he did great in phys ed. Okay, print. Now we've got an extra certificate for Hank. So there's a little sort of extra piece in there. If I was going to create a whole long series of certificates, that's what we covered 2 weeks ago when I was talking about mail merge stuff. Then I would be making a certificate in Word. I would take all this data here and export it over to Excel. Sorry, this data, fake data. Move that all over to Excel, and I would do a mail merge, because in that case, I could spit out all 180, what did I say it was? How many kids? 87, all 187 certificates with the correct award on them, all in one shot. So this little example is more of just a fun one-off to show you how you can use a drop-down list and then have that list affect other data on your spreadsheet. In fact, I think it's next week what we're going to do is take a bunch of data and tie it to on another sheet there to a little drop-down list, and then that data and that drop-down list will feed a chart. So as you make different little selections, as you get new data in on a form, your charts are going to start updating just automatically by themselves. So that's fun, but that's next week. So there's all the things I wanted to try and get through on this particular sheet. It was a fair bit, and sometimes I do that with spreadsheets, is give you a little more, give you too much in some cases. But hopefully that wasn't too much, and you're able to sort of follow along and take a look at how that's working. But it's a good option, certainly, to be able to look at all that data and be able to compare and contrast and find out what belongs and what is in both lists and what's not, how to filter things both on a sheet as well as filtering stuff over on separate sheets, just getting little filtered results. And as I suggested, you're also able to go ahead and take any of those filtered results, regardless of what formulas and functions you may have used to get those results, and you can go ahead and just copy paste that stuff right into an Excel file if you want to start using that same data over in Excel and breaking it down with filter functions, or sorry, not filter, that'd be a bad example, counting functions or summaries or any other kind of function you might want to do with Excel. So hopefully that's a helpful option with all the spreadsheets and data and such that we're collecting all the time via forms and PowerTeacher and everything else. Hopefully you're able to go ahead and use this information and make some use of it as you're moving forward with all of your data.